to hear the chattering and knowing that people are visiting and enjoying each other, and in some cases, solving all the problems in the world, at least in Elder Question with day trips. Anyway, it's wonderful to have you here. Looking forward to the potpourri. And I am not the person in charge of potpourris. I just come and enjoy them. So I'm going to give the mic right now to Julie Red, who is our potpourri board member. And from here on, every potpourri she will be conducting. Julie, I'm happy to turn the mic over to you. And
Cheryl. Okay. So good to be here today. I'm introducing someone who's very important to me. He's my good husband, Brandt Red. He's a visiting professor at BYU in cybersecurity and information technology. So I will turn the time over to him. And if you've got lots of questions, there's also a handout. Make sure you have the handout, and we'll go from there.
Oh. Interrupt me with the mic too. Okay, so I'm going to, as Julie said, talk about cybersecurity. And before I get into some, people have advertised this as how to protect yourself, and I'm certainly going to talk about that. But before I do that, I really want to put this in the context of the overall world of cybersecurity. And so we're going to start, though, by talking a little bit about myself. That's because my friend and my students say that you've got to prove to your audience that you're qualified to talk about your subject. I don't know if that's really true or not, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but these logos give you an idea of some of my experience and background. My two major focuses in study and theory are IT and cybersecurity, as Julie mentioned, and that's where I am a visiting professor at BYU, and then also in education technology. And the nice thing is that the education technology opportunity has allowed me to talk to some of the world experts in learning theory, how people learn, in learning science, and some of those kinds of things. And so that's actually been a lovely experience as well. And that's actually what I did at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the 3 years, is run their education technology strategy. I am presently a PhD student at the University of Utah. Yes, you can do this late in life. I started at 59. I am now 2.5 years into it. And I am also, of course, a professor at BYU. So yeah, we've got split loyalties, or I would like to call it dual loyalties rather than split loyalties, right? Just like love, you can have loyalties to many different things, and it doesn't diminish your loyalty to something else. Okay, so going from there, let's talk a little bit about the program at BYU. This is a picture of some of my students from last August. You can see they've got all their computers out. They've got a bunch of munchies. They've got a bunch of things. This is actually from the competition room. Let me tell you about these students. They went to present at DEF CON, which is the biggest national conference on cybersecurity each year. It's a professional conference, not an academic one. And so you've got all these different companies and organizations and people. And since it is in security and digital security and so on, you have some people who are kind of in the gray area in terms of cybersecurity. And you have some people that are definitely there in the law enforcement and on the right side of the law and all that kind of stuff. So it's a big, crazy, amazing event that happens. Well, they were there to present, and I'll talk a little bit later about what they presented about. They actually had two presentations. Ava right here, you can see her face right there. Does my mouse show up? Yeah, it kind of jiggles, but you get the idea. Ava was there presenting on one subject, and several of the others were presenting on another subject. And they were there and they said, wow, we have a cybersecurity competition going on at this. It was the NCL team. I forget what NCL stands for, but the NCL had sponsored this competition. Now, this is not unusual in cybersecurity to have competitions. People set up a system, and then you see if you can break into it. Or so that's the known as a capture the flag competition. The flag is some secret that they've got on this computer system. You break in, you find the flag, and then and then who can find the most flags in the shortest period of time wins the competition. Then we have what are known as red team, blue team competitions. You set up a network with a bunch of computers and firewalls and so on. The blue team's job is to defend the network, and the red team's job is to break in. And they're going against each other and see if the red team succeeds in taking it down or the blue team succeeds in keeping it up. And the people who set up the competition deliberately put in some vulnerabilities. So the blue team's there trying to find the vulnerabilities and patch all the holes before the red team finds them and breaks into the system. And then we have King of the Hill. That's where you take over a server and as the administrator, and you're in charge of that server, and other people are trying to take over it and become the administrator of the server and knock you out. And so all these kinds of competitions happen. Well, these folks actually happen to be experienced competitors because our cybersecurity club actually runs competitions every weekend, and then a big one at the end of each semester. So that they do, and so they had some experience. They said, "Hey, what the heck? Let's enter the competition. We're here to give presentations, but let's join the competition." So they kind of put themselves together, said, "We're forming a team, and we're joining the competition." Well, you notice that it says they came in second place. That's not the whole story. They tied for first place with the FBI. And then the organizers of the competition said, well, we can't have a tie, so we're going to put in a sudden death tiebreaker, and the FBI happened to win the sudden death. So there we go. These people are in the class of at least the FBI team, not necessarily the whole FBI, but these are really sharp kids, and every one of them has been in one of my classes. I know these guys. They're awesome. I just love them. That's part of the reason why I do what I do. So let's talk then about the problem. When we surveyed the top 50 computer science programs in the world, we found that only 4 of them require a course in cybersecurity. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that people are building software that has vulnerabilities in them. And then we have all these cybersecurity professionals who are out there finding the vulnerabilities, reporting to the companies. There are bug bounties out there where they'll actually pay you money to find the vulnerabilities in their software, and then they go fix them, because they would prefer to have a cybersecurity expert find the hole, tell them about it, fix it before the criminals find the hole, and so on. So they're bug bounty programs, and they're literally these are white hat hackers, we call them. They're professional hackers. They make all their money just by finding security vulnerabilities, and they're on the proper side of the law, and they're not breaking the law, because in every case they make sure that before they attack a system that they have authorization from the owner of that system that they can do that. So the problem is that we're not teaching the people who write the software to make it secure. They're patching it up after the fact. It's kind of a problem. In fact, that is the area of my PhD research, is in cybersecurity education. How do we teach these computer science undergrads the principles of security? We're teaching them to our cybersecurity students. That's awesome, but we need to teach it to the computer science students as well. So that's the part that I'm working on. Let's talk about it for all of us. We spend half of our lives in cyberspace, if you can think of it that way. We've got instant communication. The knowledge of your world is at your fingertips. I mean, think of it. Did the King of England in the 1800s have the kind of knowledge that your average person has? When I was at the Gates Foundation, some of my colleagues worked with the homeless program. The Gates Foundation has a Northwest homeless program, and they focus on family homelessness. So they're worrying about teenagers and children and so on. When they talked to the teenagers, when they surveyed them, these homeless teenagers, they said, which would you, now keep in mind, these are homeless kids, right? Which would you rather go without for a day? Food or your phone? They said food. They would give up the food for a day rather than give up their phone for a day. Why is that? Now, and of course, there were programs that were getting phones to these kids. These kids are homeless. Their only way of staying in touch with their friends is online in cyberspace, because they're moving around. They're not in a consistent location anytime. So they would prefer to keep that phone for a day and go without a meal. And it's kind of crazy how that works. But all of a sudden, we're in this situation where artwork, where communications, where you're writing. Would anybody consider writing a book without the assistance of some computing power? I mean, that's been the case for 20 or 30 years. Word processing revolutionized the task of writing. And so we're spending all of our time in this cyberspace. And yet the cyberspace is kind of a frontier. In fact, that's what the Electronic Frontier Foundation describes it as. It's like the Old West, at least the Old West described in movies, which may be fictional. But anyway, it's like the Old West. It's this unsettled frontier. People are going out there, they're creating homesteads, they're setting up their things. But so far, the laws and the authority and civilization hasn't quite caught up with the frontier. And as a result, those homesteaders had to have their own guns. They had to have their own protection. They had to worry about what was going on. Turns out that the electronic frontier is a little different from that. Now, this was founded 30 years ago in the 1990s, and it's improved. And at the time, the Electronic Frontier Foundation started primarily to inform law enforcement and legislatures about the craziness of what they were doing, because they were clueless about the laws they were passing and the laws they were trying to enforce. People were getting arrested for creating a novel about something going on in cyberspace because they thought it was a manual on how to break into systems and not a story about people breaking into systems. I mean, crazy stuff was going on. And so they decided we needed an advocacy group to work with that. Now, I don't agree with everything that the Electronic Frontier Foundation does. They are an advocacy group and they tend to have an interesting position. But generally speaking, if you look at what they advise and what they talk about, it all kind of makes sense as you dig into it, but it makes sense from an information technology perspective. And that's a different perspective from the one we see most of the time. I'll just give you one example. And this, of course, let's pick a controversial example, right? Abortion. What does the Electronic Frontier Foundation do or care about abortion? Well, they're worried about laws that punish people. Let's take Texas, for example. In Texas, not only is abortion illegal, but if you report information about somebody who might have gotten an abortion and they don't test whether the information is valid or not, you get a $1,000 reward from the government in Texas. And yeah, this is kind of a problematic law. No matter where you sit on the spectrum of abortion, this is kind of a problem because people can make stuff up and earn $1,000, and then somebody else gets in trouble for this. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation goes in there and says they're not necessarily taking a position on abortion itself, but they do take a position on the privacy of medical records, who can have them and who can disclose them. In their opinion, it should be illegal to get access to somebody's medical records about their reproductive system. Okay, now you start to see there's a different perspective. You start looking at it from this data science, data security perspective, and the world looks different. And that's what the Electronic Frontier Foundation is trying to do, is help us see the world in a little bit different perspective and understand what policies should be done in those perspectives. So let's take a look. What is it like on the frontier right now? Because we are still, even 30 years later, the frontier hasn't been fully settled. And I'm going to just talk about some of the things that are going on. So this is the 2024 Cyber Threat Defense Report from the Cyber Edge Group. They update this report every year. It's about a 30 or 40 page report, and then they create this nice infographic to summarize some of the biggest things that are going on. And rather than make you try to read that tiny print there, we're going to just highlight a couple of things, both from the report and from the infographic. This graph right here is the fraction of organizations in their survey. They survey companies all over the world. The fraction of organizations in the survey that were compromised by a successful cyber attack. Okay, these are the fraction of the companies that actually had a successful attack, not an unsuccessful one. 81.5 in 2024, and they're celebrating because that's down from prior years. How's that? Also from the 2024 report, 64% of organizations were victimized by a successful ransomware attack. What's a ransomware attack? This is where they break into your computer and they encrypt all of your information. And then they say, if you pay our ransom, we will give you your information back. We'll decrypt it, okay? Of those 64% that were victimized, 49% of them actually paid the ransom. This is big business for these they call them cyber gangs. They're mostly overseas and they break into your systems. 49% of them paid the ransom, and the average ransom was over $500,000. This is big money, okay? And now guess what? The report says, oh, this is great because it's down from 73% of organizations victimized last year, of which 60% of them paid the ransom. One of the big news stories last year, the Los Angeles Unified School District was victimized by a ransomware attack. And in this case, not only did they encrypt their data and take it away, but they also stole the data. And they said, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to disclose all this data on the internet. We're going to give it away, all this data about your students. Los Angeles Unified said, well, we've got backups of all of our data, so we haven't lost anything. So they restored their data from the backups, so the encryption didn't get in the way, and they said, do it. We're not going to pay your ransom. We want to use this money to educate students instead. And so they kind of stared them down. Well, guess what happened? They did. They dumped all the data out on the internet. Turns out not that much of it was terribly dangerous. You did find out some grades from students that you probably shouldn't have known, and a few things like that. But it wasn't that bad. So we're starting to see, and that's why it's actually down. Nevertheless, we've got a majority of companies who were compromised by some kind of a ransomware attack just in the previous year. So this is a big deal. Life on the frontier, you are literally, law enforcement is not protecting these companies. They have to protect themselves. And that's why we had 100% placement of our students last year in our cybersecurity program. There's a shortfall of more than 800,000 cybersecurity professionals in this country alone, not to mention there are that many job openings that are going unfilled, okay? Let's talk about the threats. The foremost threat, according to the experts on these companies, is malware. This is viruses and worms, things that encrypt your data, for example. Phishing and spear phishing attacks. If you've heard of a phishing attack, that's where they send you an email and try to convince you to do something, okay? Taking over accounts, which usually happens a consequence of phishing, then they're able to break in and then they have full control over the system and can steal data and so forth. And then ransomware, number 4. Despite all of this ransomware, that's still number 4 on their list. They worry about these other things more. So life on the frontier actually remains a dangerous place. And the thing is, this affects all of us, because if your insurance company gets victimized by a data break-in, all of a sudden your insurance, or all of your information just got leaked. And they might be able to do some things with that aren't great for you. Here are a few headlines. I don't have time to go into detail on all of these, but we are sharing the slides, and I'll actually have a link to this as well. So each one of these, and it's too small for you to read probably, but each one of these has a link to the actual story, so you can go read them. But a few cases: PowerSchool suffered a significant data breach. Companies stole information about nearly every student in PowerSchool, and this is millions of students across the country, and they paid the ransom to keep that data from being disclosed, okay? The Silk Typhoon Chinese state hackers broke into the Department of Treasury on their computer systems and were able to access information about sanctions. They were getting into trying to figure out what companies were being sanctioned and why by the Treasury Department. TP-Link routers might get banned. Why? Simply because those routers are built by a Chinese company, and the Chinese law says that the Chinese government can ask companies to put in security backdoors so that they can access your data and prohibit you from disclosing that to your customers, okay? Russian hackers target diplomats in a spear phishing campaign. So they got into WhatsApp, and it's a pretty sophisticated attack, but they convinced the WhatsApp users that they were just connecting to another diplomat, when in fact they were giving access to their whole WhatsApp account to Russian hackers, okay? That's kind of a problem. Let's see, what else? TikTok. Okay, you've probably seen this because it was all over the news this week. TikTok was banned by Congress. They said you have to give over at least half the ownership to a US-based company. And then all the TikTok people went crazy. All the influencers tried to influence people not to do the TikTok ban. And then they ran it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yes, it is legal to ban TikTok. And then President Trump, as he took over, said, well, we're going to give you 90 days. So the ban got suspended for 90 days while they tried to work out another solution. But why did Congress ban TikTok in the first place? And it was bipartisan. Only a few members of Congress voted against this. The vast majority in both parties voted for this. Why were the Congress people of our country convinced that TikTok is bad? Well, it turns out that it has all kinds of information, and the owners of TikTok get to control through the algorithm what people are going to see. And can you bias people's opinions? You get onto TikTok. I want to take a break. I'm going to watch a few silly short videos, right? Well, those videos are being chosen by the owners of TikTok. So if you want to influence the young population of the United States, you get them all using their app. And great. This is really awesome. Since TikTok is being threatened to ban, all of the influencers are switching over to this thing called Red Score or something. I forget it. It's Red something or other. And they're all switching over to this thing, which is, guess what? Created by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, well, you know, whether you are, it doesn't matter whether you are politically having a foreign country strongly influence the opinions of the members of the citizens of our country doesn't sound like it's the right thing to allow to have happen, right? You can be wherever you are on the political spectrum and still say foreign actors controlling our opinions is kind of a bad idea. So you can see the details in this text. This is from the text of the, actually this is the introduction to the bill, but it's in the official website from Congress. And this is from the official opinion of the Supreme Court on the TikTok. So are we on the frontier? Absolutely, we're on the frontier. What else? Well, Mozilla last year, this is in 2023, so this is a little bit more than a year old, called your car a privacy nightmare on wheels. Every car brand reviewed by Mozilla flunks their privacy test, meaning their disclosure of data. Okay, your car has sensors. It knows how it's moving. It knows how fast you're driving. It has GPS sensors. It knows exactly where you're located. And they're uploading all of this information to the car manufacturer. And if you look in your owner's manual of your car, it will say, here are all the rights that your car manufacturer has to your data, amongst which is selling it to anybody they feel like selling it to, okay? This is a quote from the article. Cars collect and share deeply personal data, including sexual activity. They say, sexual activity? Well, it turns out they've got motion sensors in the cars. They know how the car is moving. Okay, and apparently they've got ways of using machine learning to discover what kind of movement means what thing. I don't know. Facial expressions, they have cameras to try and determine if you're using the lane assist and that driver assistant stuff. They want to make sure that you're still alert. And so they have cameras keeping track of how alert you look. And they're going to share that data. They actually send that data up. Now, if you thought this was bad, this is what Senator Slotkin wrote. Now, she's a former CIA analyst, Democratic senator from Michigan. She said, a Chinese-made connected vehicle is like an intelligence collection office on wheels, 3D mapping, LiDAR geolocation of individual drivers, full mission video. And she asked the Secretary of Defense, would you like to have this information about the roads in China? And he said, yeah. Well, guess what? If we get Chinese-made vehicles with cameras and all this kinds of stuff that we put on our cars, sure enough, they're going to send all that data back and they'll have detailed information about every street in the country, which is why she is trying to keep us from importing cars manufactured in China. Okay, I kind of agree with her. Right? So, some more U.S. News and World Report. Yes, your car is spying on you. What can you do about it? FTC orders GM to stop collecting and selling driver's data. It turns out GM cars were collecting information about driving behavior, selling it to the insurance companies, and the insurance companies were raising rates according to people who were driving dangerously. Okay, this is real. This is not just a threat. It's not something that could happen. It actually happened, which is why the FTC told them to stop. Okay, even worse, Tesla must be punished for tasteless sharing of car camera images. Tesla cars, if you don't know this, have cameras on every corner and interior cameras as well on many of those Teslas. They were being uploaded to Tesla headquarters, and the people who are in there analyzing the cameras, supposedly to help the self-driving features of the car and help that, use the internal social network at Tesla to share what they considered humorous photos and images and videos that the cars had collected, including accidents where people were hit and went flying, situations where somebody was walking out to their car with no clothes on. Don't know why, but that's what they were doing, and it was caught on video, and they shared it around. And so, yeah, your cars are spying on you. Okay, we are on the digital frontier. For what it's worth, our newest car was built in 2010. It has a little bit of motion sensing, but it has no connectivity back to the manufacturer. We're actually not interested in buying a new car anytime soon. For some of these reasons. Okay, a Chinese ship dragged its anchor for 100 miles and broke two fiber optic cables in the Baltic Sea, severing the communication, partially severing the communication with rival countries such as Finland. Okay, and as a result, NATO has deployed 20 sea drones. These are boats that have no driver. They're just computer controlled. They're running around there, and they have 11 more manned ships that are patrolling the Baltic Sea to make sure other people don't do this. Meanwhile, diplomats came out and said, no, it was just an accident. Nobody did this on purpose. So you decide. So you say, in this crazy situation, how come warring countries really all connect to the same internet? If we're at war with each other, we're using the same internet. Yep, there's only one internet in the world, and everybody uses it. So let's get into just a little bit. I'm only going to take a minute on this, but just a little bit about how that happens. So this is, you can't see this very well, so you'll have to look at the slides later. This is the submarine cable map. You can tell lots of lines there, lots of lines elsewhere, and so on. I mean, there are thousands, not just simply hundreds, but thousands of undersea cables. And you can see along the coast of Africa, they figured out that to connect countries on the coast of Africa, it's easier to put the fiber in the ocean than across the land. Okay, and same thing kind of getting along the coast of South America. We've got cables all over the place. There are thousands of cables going around the world, not to mention the fiber that's going across the land and so forth. The world is amazingly connected. Now, the internet, it turns out, was invented by the US Department of Defense, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. And in the early days, it was actually called DARPANET before it got commercialized and other people put it together. And one of the things that the creators of the internet were commissioned with by the Department of Defense is create a network that would survive a nuclear attack. In other words, if certain nodes were completely destroyed, the internet would keep working. And as a result, it is a big mesh. It's not like a tree or what we call in computer science, a spanning tree, which is one connection to every node, and then they go to multiple internal nodes. There are redundant connections across all of this. And so we have all these redundant connections, and you say, well, then who controls it? Well, it turns out no single entity controls all of this. It's been divided up. So this is kind of a little graph. We have these backbone internet service providers. There are 16 of them throughout the world, and they provide the major access in the internet. backbone internet service providers exchange information with each other through exchange points. And there are a number of them around the world. Literally a skyscraper in Los Angeles is the exchange point between a bunch of the major ISPs. And it's got like 16 floors, and all that's in there are routers and wires and fiber and connections. Very high security there. Similar one in New York City and other ones around the world where all these networks connect to each other. Well, the backbone ISPs connect to regional internet service providers, and those regional service providers connect to local service providers who then connect to your home and business and all those kinds of things. So it just kind of cascades down. The difference between the backbones is they don't have to pay each other. And that's what makes you a tier 1 network, is that you're big enough that you simply agree with your peers that you're going to exchange data without having to pay anybody for it. If you're a regional or a local internet service provider, you're finding somebody that's one tier above you, and you're paying them for your access, and they're paying whoever's above them for that access until you get all the way up to the tier 1s. And the tier 1s are all just saying, okay, we will work together. So there's 16 of them. Here they are. Since the internet started in the United States, we have an overabundance. We've got AT&T, Comcast, GTT, Lumen, T-Mobile. Interestingly, T-Mobile is a German company, but T-Mobile USA is one of the backbones, not T-Mobile Germany. And then we have Verizon and Zayo. Are all tier 1 internet service providers. You have other service providers step down. Interestingly enough, China, the most populous country in the world, only has a tier 1 in Hong Kong, wherever that is. It's in here somewhere. PCCW. And internal to the country of China, they have their nationwide internet service provider, which is done by the government and sits behind what we call the Great Firewall of China, which only lets the things the Chinese government wants to get into their network to get in and get out. So they filter their internet. Now you can penetrate that with a virtual private network, a VPN, but without a VPN, you're only going to get what China wants you to get when you're within those borders. We have, you still have to have an internet address, and all the routers need to know how to route the data across the internet. So the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority is the one that gives out internet addresses and also the DNS names that are in the world. And it is governed by an international, multinational board of governors, but they are located actually in California. It's a not-for-profit, and this is how you get your addresses, how you get your services from that divided up thing. So these are just a little taste of how the internet works. With all of that in place, I'm going to get into a little bit of cybersecurity theory, and then we're going to apply it to ourselves and see how we can try to be more secure users of the internet and all the data, and how we can also protect our families. So you saw this on the first slide, some cybersecurity theory. Cybersecurity involves both security and privacy. We're trying to protect both. So we're trying to protect your sensitive information, and we're also trying to protect you from invasions of your privacy. And in both areas, we have social and technical issues. So here we see a security operations center similar to the one we have at BYU, where you're watching out for the technology for people breaking into the system, or evidence that some data breach might be underway and that sort of thing. But you also have to worry about the social context. Here we've got somebody's password written on a sticky note in front of their screen. Probably not a good idea, right? On the privacy side, we worry about what people are monitoring. What do they know about me? What does YouTube know about my interests? Because of all the particular articles I read and so on. And that's in the technical side, because there's all kinds of monitoring and data collection going on. And who do they share it with? Who do they sell my data to? Okay. How does Google even make their money, since we don't pay Google anything? It turns out they make their money on collecting data and selling it to others, including advertisers, okay? And then on the social side, what social information do I share with my families, and how secure is it? Which applications do I use, and do those applications protect my data, or do those applications give it away? The most popular chat application in the world is called WeChat, most popular in terms of users, and that's because it happens to be the preferred tool in China. Well, it's actually well known that the Chinese government has enough influence over WeChat that they're monitoring a lot of the conversations going on there. Elsewhere in the world, WhatsApp is very popular for, thankfully, a very good reason. It turns out WhatsApp uses end-to-end encryption. So if I send a message to my daughter-in-law on WhatsApp, which I actually did this morning, it's encrypted on my phone and sent through the WhatsApp network and arrives on her phone. My phone and her phone both have the key. WhatsApp does not. So they are not able to read they know that I sent a message to her, but they don't know what was in the message. They don't know the content of that message. So we have at least a little bit better security in those ways. In that context, then, if we think of the social part of this, we're going to talk about Kevin Mitnick for a little while. He was a felon, went to prison for some hacking behavior. When he got out, he became a huge advocate for security. So maybe the prison reform actually worked in one case. Anyway, he says a company can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and encryption and other security technologies. So we're back up here in this technical side, right? Security technical. We're up in that quadrant. And he says, but if an attacker can call one trusted person within that company and that person complies, and if the attacker gets in, then all that money spent on technology is essentially wasted. Okay, and if we go back to some of those slides I was showing you about these different break-ins, break-in at the Department of Treasury, break-ins at other things, and the stuff that was compromised, in nearly every case, it's because they got somebody in the organization to help them out. Not that that person was malicious, although sometimes they are. We do have insider threats. Usually it's because that person was tricked into doing something that they should not have done. So you have to have what we call an adversarial mindset. Now, when we went to BYU and we said, we want to create a cybersecurity minor that people can, anybody on campus, any major can get the cybersecurity minor. It doesn't matter if you're in the humanities or music or whatever. We're going to teach the principles of cybersecurity in such a way that these students are going to be able to understand and apply the information. And they said, great, what are your learning objectives? Well, adversarial mindset. Whoa, wait a second. You're going to teach adversarial mindset? The answer is absolutely. You need to think like your attacker if you're going to protect yourself. Okay, so how do you think like your attacker? Well, let's think of what they do. First off, they're not going to show up in person because that's too expensive. Okay, these people are doing a big scatter shot. They're doing things that are cheap and inexpensive and hitting as many people as possible in hopes that they can break through on that. So they're going to contact you electronically, phone sometimes, more likely email or text, because they can send out hundreds of thousands or millions of emails and text cheaply. If they call you on the phone, that's going to take a little bit more work. What they really want to do, if they're going to use the phone, is convince you to call them back, right? So they're going to send you a text that says, there's a problem with your Social Security, and call us back at this phone number so that we can get that corrected. Otherwise, it's all going to be cut off. Okay. I think everybody's probably received a message of that sort. And so you call them back at that phone number, right? Well, that's not the phone number of the Social Security Agency. So if they're going to contact you by phone, usually it's a call back. It's not a call to you. But yeah, there's plenty of scam phone calls too. Sometimes they're a computer at the other end, and sometimes they're a real human. What are they after? Well, they want your money, of course. They want your information because they want to know about you. If they can know the names of your children and grandchildren and your dog and your birth date and your address and a few of those other things, they're probably going to be able to crack your password, because your password most likely is going to be based on some of that information. Okay, well, let's face it. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but how many of you have your passwords based on some of that information that I just rattled off? Okay, so we're going to talk about passwords in a minute, but suffice it to say, they want your information because given information about you, they can attack you in another way. Okay, think of this. Who has been to a timeshare presentation? Yeah, okay. Most people have been to a timeshare. The first thing the salesman does in the timeshare presentation is they ask you, how often do you go on vacations? How much money do you spend on vacations? What places do you like to travel to? And they ask you all these questions. Sounds this really friendly, lovely conversation. Okay, 45 minutes later, they're coming back to you saying, wow, you're spending, $2,500 per vacation. Guess what? We can get you. They take all that information and they use it against you. You just gave them ammunition. Okay. So timeshares are not nearly as bad as some of these things, but keep in mind, any information you give someone is probably going to get used against you in some way. So you don't want to give away information. Finally, of course, they want your credentials, because if they can get your password to your bank account, then they can just send all of your money to them. Great. Okay, and how are they going to motivate you? They're going to make an emotional appeal. Somebody is in distress. Somebody could use some help. Or, don't you care about hackers? We need money too. I mean, that has actually happened. I'm not kidding. And they're going to make it urgent. They're always going to make it urgent. Why? Because urgency causes us to suspend judgment. Okay, so if you see urgency, oh, you've got to act within the next 48 hours. Oh, you need to call us back right now, or else you're gonna something's gonna happen to you. Okay, in fact, you just got a text that you showed me a minute ago. The driver's license would be suspended unless you pay your tolls, right? Okay, they now it turns out they don't suspend driver's license over unpaid tolls. But they had to create this urgency to get you to act quickly, because you're going to be in trouble. Guess what? That urgency is artificial. Don't act quickly on any of these things. Okay, that's your best defense. There are lots of other defenses, but the first one is don't act quickly. So let's see. I'm looking at how much time we've got. Yeah, we've got time. Okay, we're going to take a pause here. I want everybody to find a neighbor who's not your spouse. So everybody find a neighbor, or maybe a trio, and we're going to give you a couple of minutes. In your first minute, one of you tell the other about a scam you know about, okay? Something that either happened to you or something that happened to someone you know, okay? And then in the second minute, the other person you just trade places and tell a story about something that happened. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes on that.
Someone. I do. I like the other response.
I hate to cut you off, but I'm only going to give you about 30 more seconds. Sorry, because you do have to finish, but 30 seconds.
You knew it was a scam. Way of getting even with and he said they called right back when he hung up. What am I saying? Anyway, that's funny when you do stories. I get stuff in my emails and about, hey, here's an invoice. Thank you for buying this copy. And if you click on it, all of a sudden you're buying it.
Okay.
I get those kinds of things.
Sorry to have to shut this conversation down because I think we could do this for an hour, right? Who could do this for an hour to talk about these things? Yep. Yeah. So I will say this is an activity that bears repeating. It turns out as you tell the stories, you start to see the patterns. And as you see the patterns, you protect yourself. So one of my top recommendations in this is read the stories, tell the stories. Know the stories about these. Hopefully, it'll become to the point where you're telling the stories about attempted scams as opposed to successful ones, right? So we hope to get to that point. But anyway, that is one of the key protections is the stories. Tell stories, lead stories. Okay, by a show of hands, in the stories you either told or heard, was there urgency? Yeah, urgency, right? It's always there, okay? Were they after one of these three things? Money, information, credentials? Yeah, usually money. Yep, usually money, and the others are actually means to get to money, let's face it. And so these are the things. Think like an attacker. Look at these patterns. Now, there's lots of training out there that'll say, okay, here's what a phishing attack looks like. Here's an example phishing email, and look for the signs like misspelled words and poor grammar and those kinds of things. Why do you think scammers have misspelled words and poor grammar? Are they really that bad? That's what I used to think. The answer is no, they're not that bad. Well, yeah, they are from other countries, but you know what? There's spell checkers, there's grammar checkers, there's AI. In fact, one of my colleagues did a study where they had AI generate phishing messages and humans generate phishing messages and see which one was better. Humans were slightly better, but not by much. So you can get all kinds of phishing messages with perfectly formed grammar and perfect spelling out of there. So why is that in there? Well, it turns out that the scammers don't want to waste their time with people who aren't going to be victimized. So they actually put little cues in there that the smarter people are going to recognize. And that way, the more vulnerable are the ones who are going to call them up. Isn't that sad? Scary. But that said, those cues change because people get more savvy and they start to know what cues to look for. And so they switch. So looking for poor grammar and misspelled words, that's not necessarily going to work next time. They're going to change. They change and adapt. Your adversaries change and adapt. So that's why I use this pattern here and not some of those other patterns, because the patterns change, the scams change, the things change. They invent new ways to take advantage of us. But these things are common. The urgency is common. What they're after is common. The means of contacting you is fairly common as well. Okay, so. Here again, we're getting into cybersecurity theory. We start with the CIA triad. This goes back about 25 years, and it has nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA triad are the things we are trying to protect, and they stand for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is making sure that the information does not go to people who should not have the information. Integrity means that we preserve the information and don't let it get manipulated or changed. And availability means that the system is available. You can log into it, you can get access to your data. Now, about 15 years ago, experts decided to increase that to the CIAN pentad, which is not easy to say as the CIA triad, but we have the CIAN pentad. In addition to those three, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we added non-repudiation and authentication. Non-repudiation is the ability to prove that somebody was the sender of a message and that somebody was the receiver of a message, okay? And it turns out that they added that because it's a huge missing piece. Our email protocols are written before some of the security needs were understood, and as a result, we don't have non-repudiation in email. When you see an email that comes from President Trump, it can look for all the world like it came from President Trump, and there's not much you can do to tell whether that's real or not. So we don't have non-repudiation in our email. We do in some alternative apps like WhatsApp. We'll actually authenticate that this is the same person that you messaged last time, but it still doesn't verify that my daughter-in-law, Ellie, is actually my daughter-in-law, Ellie, and not somebody else named Ellie or somebody impersonating Ellie. I only know that this is the same Ellie that I have communicated with in the past. Now, when we're together in the same room and I send her a message and she receives it, then we know, yep, this is the right Ellie, right? But so we have this we actually have some dangerous lack of non-repudiation, but it is something that we are working on in the security industry. Keep in mind, though, that across most applications, non-repudiation is weak, okay? Now, for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to focus on authentication. Authentication is determining whether someone is who they claim to be, okay? That seems reasonable. Somebody claims to be someone, you find out, are they really that someone? You go to log in your bank, I say I'm Brandt Red, and it says, are you really Brandt Red, or are you somebody impersonating Brandt Red? Well, the bank wants to know before they let me start transferring money around, okay? So they're going to use one of three means, and sometimes more than one, to determine who I am, if I really am who I think they am. They're going to use something I know, typically a password, but something I know. Sometimes they have authentication questions. It turns out those have fallen into disrepute, so they don't use them anymore. But they're going to use something I know, or they're going to use something I am. That's a biometric. So my fingerprint, a face recognition, something like that. Or they'll use something that I have, like my phone. They'll send a text message to my phone saying, please enter this code. What are they doing? They're seeing if I'm the possessor of the phone that got registered as the second factor on authentication. So when you hear about multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, they're going to use two of these. They'll use something you know plus something you are or something you have in order to authenticate you. Single factor authentication is only going to use one of those. So of course, two-factor is better than one factor, right? Well, it's more secure, but what if you're trying to get into your bank account and you left your phone at home? All of a sudden, going back to our theory, right? You have just lost availability. Turns out authentication and availability are in conflict with each other. Stronger authentication means for weaker availability. So we have to keep these things in balance with each other, and it's a tricky balance that we work with. Nevertheless, authentication turns out to be a big deal, and password authentication, with tons of flaws, tends to be how we work these days. So we're going to talk a little bit about password authentication. On the left is a webcomic from 2011, so it's a few years old, where an expert told us how we should form our passwords. This thing has been shared in thousands of presentations because it tells some real truth. It turns out they take this password, right? You used Troubadour and then you added some special characters and your substitutions, and you end up with 28 bits of integrity, of entropy, quote unquote. Entropy is how random is this? Another way of thinking of it is it takes 2 to the 28 tries for a password cracker to break that password, okay? Well, what's 2 to the 28? I should know this one. I know that 2 to the 20th is approximately 1 million. So 2 to the 28th is going to be about 200 million, approximately 200 million guesses. Okay, guess what? A tool that my students used in my class last semester to break the passwords on the operating system can try 3 billion passwords a second. So you do a password like this, and you brute force try to break that password, and in a couple seconds, we're going to break that password. Now, it turns out this is not most password crackers. I wouldn't be able to do that on this computer. That requires a big computer with a big GPU in it and a bunch of stuff to get to 3 billion passwords a second. But tracking now in this, written in 2011, he was talking about 1,000 guesses a second. And he said that's still going to happen within 3 days. Okay. So yeah, on the other hand, you take 4 random words and put them together, and you don't even use upper and lower case or any of that kind of stuff. And guess what? You've got 44 bits of entropy, and it's going to take that same computer 550 years. Okay, that's great, except that computers have gotten faster in the last 14 years. And it turns out that even with 44 bits of entropy, Hashcat still might break that password in a few days. So yeah. We've got passwords have problems. First off, coming up with a password. Now, this is still good advice. Pick 4 random words is going to be a much better password than doing something like this. That's still good advice. But the performance of computers and hashing algorithms and that kind of stuff is also increasing in competition with the passwords. So, but I'll just take this example. This is from just a couple of days ago. I was helping my wife set up for a trip that some of you are probably going on with her, but on a cruise. And it says, your password must be between 7 and 15 characters. Oh, guess what? Correct horse battery staple is more than 15 characters. That would not qualify as a password on Holland America. And then they say 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 number, and 1 special character. Oh, wow. They're back in these 28 bits of entropy breaking in a few seconds world. And this is 14 years after better advice came out. And in fact, the National Institute of Standards and Technology just 2 years ago published guidelines that the websites haven't caught up with. So what can we do? Well, it turns out within those 15 characters, you can create a completely random series of letters and numbers. And that actually is going to be hard to break. And it's going to take a long time for a password cracker. Because what do the password crackers do? They take a dictionary and they try all the words in the dictionary. And then, but even better, the password crackers will first say, what do you know about this person? Enter their birth date, enter the names of their family members, enter their name, of course, enter the names of their dogs, the street that they live in, and you enter all this information, and then it tries variations on all of that information combined with a few numbers and a few other things, common numbers like 42, because that's the answer to the life of the universe and everything. And they'll throw in a bunch of those kinds of things. And by using these common things, they will oftentimes break the password in just a few minutes before they go to a brute force and trying every random thing out there. So yeah, it turns out you're better off using a nice long phrase like this, or using some completely impossible to memorize series of letters and numbers. Well, this is sounding kind of hard, and it's going to get worse. This is the password guidelines from Microsoft. You should be at least 12 characters, and ideally 14 or more is better. Now look at that. They're saying 14 or more is better, and Holland America says no more than 15. Oh, okay, that's a kind of a problem. But at least these are better guidelines. Don't use real words. Make up some words or misspell your words. Make it significantly different from other passwords. Don't share your passwords. Don't send them by email, instant message, or other insecure means. Use a different password on every service. Yeah, no, this is important because think of it. Somebody breaks into you got online and you said, oh, I guess I am going to subscribe to my local Daily Herald newspaper so that I can read the local news, right? Okay, if somebody breaks into your Daily Herald account, no big deal. They're going to be able to read the news. Okay. But you use the same password on the Daily Herald as you used in your email application. What if they break into your email? Well, it turns out, how do you recover when you forgot your password? You go to the site and you say, I forgot my password. And they said, okay, we're going to send you a special password reset message to your email. Somebody breaks into your email, they're into everything that you've got, okay? So you use the same password on your email as you used on your on your Daily Herald, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. So don't use the same password. Don't reuse passwords. And don't write your passwords on sticky notes or anything close to your computer, and enable multi-factor authentication when available. Great advice. Now, let me ask you something. Is this reasonable? It's good advice, right? This is what everybody tells you. Every security expert out there is going to tell you the same thing I just did. And yet, who has at least 25 accounts? Who has at least 50 accounts? Who doesn't even know how many, but it's probably over 100. Okay? Are you going to memorize 100 different passwords? Not unless you're the world memory champion. It turns out you have memory championships, but not unless you're that person. So what are we supposed to do about this? Well, guess what? I have my own guidelines. This is what we're going to wrap up with. I've only got 3 minutes left. So I've gone as fast as I could, but we're running out of time. So follow that advice about passwords. But first, choose your web browser intentionally. What? Who's saying that? Well, it turns out, guess what? Your web browser will save your passwords. And some people say, well, that's not safe. Well, it all depends on who you trust, right? Turns out that you're already trusting your web browser company, because guess what? You type your password into your web browser. Okay, if your web browser wants to intercept your password, it can. So if you're using Chrome, you're trusting Google. Whether you chose to trust Google or not, you're trusting Google. If you're using Edge, you're trusting Microsoft. If you're using Safari, you're trusting Apple. Whether you chose to trust them or not, you are. So that's why I say choose your browser intentionally. In other words, decide who you're going to trust. Okay? Choose your browser intentionally and then use that same browser consistently. If you're using the Edge browser on your computer and you've chosen to trust Microsoft, then you use the Edge browser on your phone too. Okay? Use it. And not only that, but some people say don't log in. Yes, log into your browser so that it can share your passwords across your devices and back them up in the cloud, so that when your computer falls out the window and gets run out of a truck, and this happened, or run over by a truck, this happened to one of my students, okay? Your passwords are still saved in the cloud and you can still get into your information. Okay. Use the password management feature that's built into your browser, or use a browser add-in. There's some add-ins that I've got links to. And record your passwords immediately after they're created, and not just in the password manager of your browser. Record them somewhere else. Where am I going to tell you to record them? Surprise, in a notebook on paper. Okay? I know that sounds crazy based on what other people said, but write your passwords in a notebook on paper. Why? Well, guess what? What if you die or you're disabled and your kids need to get into your accounts? Well, they can read paper. If they're trying to get into your encrypted password manager, which, by the way, could be hacked by a Chinese person, maybe their notebook that's sitting in your locked desk drawer in your home isn't vulnerable to somebody overseas. Okay. So yeah, record your passwords and then keep that password record somewhere that certain trusted people can find and untrusted people cannot. Okay. If somebody, let's face it, we all have family members we don't necessarily trust. Okay. I'm sorry, but it's true. So your passwords should be available to those you do trust and not known to those you don't trust. Use fake throwaway accounts whenever possible. Literally fake it till you make it. I'm going to have to put some of this information on my webpage afterwards because we're out of time. And then watch for passkeys. This is a new system where instead of actually creating a password, you create a passkey, and that key will log you into this site without you having to come up with a password. Guess what stores your passkeys? Your browser does, or your browser add-in. So whatever you've chosen to save your passwords, when passkeys emerge in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be that same system. So by choosing a browser intentionally and choosing it to store your passwords, you're preparing for passkeys when they come out. You're getting advantage. So we won't have time to talk about passkeys, and they're too new anyway. So I've told you all that advice. I wanted to save time, but we do have pages for each of these, and I'm going to be sharing the slides afterwards. Here are some of your authenticator applications, which you combine with your browser password management, and you match those up. So you can see that. Here's where I talk about using a notebook to secure your passwords, and using fake identities. We talk a little bit about that. Finally, and this is the last piece of advice, and I'm already 1 minute over. Hopefully I can take 2 or 3 more minutes to go over. But turn the tables, okay? If somebody contacts you and they set off one of your warning signs, or even if they don't set off your warning signs, it's just as good for you to authenticate them as for them to authenticate you, right? If you call up your doctor, do they authenticate you before they give you information? Yep. If you call up your bank, do they authenticate you? Yep. If you call up anybody else, do they authenticate you? Yep. It's perfectly appropriate for you to authenticate them. Are you really from the IRS or from the Social Security office? What is your phone number? And get rid of that urgency business. If it's urgent, that's a red flag. Tell you what, I'm going to verify this and then I'll call you back tomorrow or in 3 days. Put them off by 3 days. Okay, 3 days is not going to get you into legal trouble, but it will cause a scammer to go away. All right. And for those of you who are religious, even angels should be authenticated. And you can read Doctrine and Covenants 129, 4 through 9. And where it tells you how to authenticate angels. Okay, so there you have it. This is the end of my presentation. This is just a summary of some of the information I've already given you. So thank you. If people are willing to hang on, I will take a few questions. But
A quick comment. You mentioned you're going to put something on the website. Is that the link at the top of the handout?
yes, the link at the top of the handout and at the bottom of this slide. If you go to that link right now, it'll say coming soon. Soon is by the end of the day.
Good. Okay.
Yes, right here.
We wait for the microphone,
Oh, yeah.
please.
What about password managers? I used to use LastPass, and then when I found out about that big hack, I just started writing them all down in a book.
Password managers are very good.
What
What's
about
happened-
LastPass?
And
They had
LastPass, despite their big hack, maybe they're the better choice because they had to respond to the big hack, right? So it's hard to say. Any company can be vulnerable. So I happen to have my password stored on Microsoft Edge with Microsoft. Okay, that means I'm trusting Microsoft. Could Microsoft go rogue or could they be hacked? Yes, it's a calculated risk, but I know that they are pretty good. Any of the biggies is pretty good about this kind of stuff. But LastPass, 1Password, some of those password managers, those are good choices. What you want to do in preparation for passkeys is make sure that whatever password manager you have also has an authenticator app for your phone. And I'm going to put more information about this on the webpage because we didn't have time for it. But also has an authenticator app for your phone, and they are preparing to do passkeys. If they're not doing those things, then choose a different tool because you need to be ready for passkeys.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here comes the mic.
Yep. Mike's on its way.
You said something about the number 42 and don't use it. Because of what reason?
This is a famous science fiction book, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the story, these people create this giant computer, figure out the answer to the life, the universe, and everything. It ponders for several centuries and comes back with the answer 42. And as a result, among people who are science fiction fans and computer users and so on, they love the number 42 and they tend to use it in passwords, which is a bad idea. Yeah, thanks for all the fish. That comes from it also. Question.
What are they doing to stop all this? Is there somebody or somewhere
Yeah.
doing a crackdown?
The frontier metaphor is really appropriate here. We are better off than we were 25 years ago when the Electronic Frontier Foundation was created. But we have a long ways to go. The CIA and the FBI recruit our students heavily. The legislators are better informed than they used to be. We have a CIA analyst in Congress, okay? Things are happening, but it's going to take a while still. We're trying to teach our computer science students security. We're making progress, but it is slow. Thank you.
Thank you. Ordinarily, I would turn this mic back to Julie. Since this is her husband, she may be hesitant to acknowledge just how fabulous this presentation was. Thank you so much, Brandt. We appreciate you being here.